Today we're going to be talking about Tolkien and Christianity. This is like J.R.R. Tolkien and his relationship with Christianity and how Christianity may have impacted his works and what he thought of Christianity and all of these things. It's just the relationship between Tolkien and Christianity. Buckle up, we're going to try to go really, really fast. Last time I practiced this, it took 40 minutes. We're going to try to go way faster than 40 minutes. All right, so what we're going to cover is obviously Tolkien's Christianity, his experience with it, how he grew up with it, his interactions with Christianity, the Great War, or World War I as we know it now, and how that impacted some of his life and some of his writing. And then we're going to talk about the evidences of Christianity inside of the works of Tolkien. Tolkien's Christianity. Tolkien was Catholic, and he was always Catholic, but his family was not. His mother, Mabel, converted to Catholicism from Episcopalianism. His mother and father were Episcopalian. Her family, they were all Episcopalian, and then when she was an adult, she converted to Catholicism, and that really messed up her family life. Her parents disowned her. Her husband refused to speak with her about religion anymore and always kind of was bitter towards that. However, she put in a lot of work to go to Mass all the time and be a good Catholic. She also made sure that her two boys went to Catholic schools and got a Catholic upbringing. However, J.R.R. Tolkien attributed her early death to the stress from her conversion, and in a way that commitment that she showed doubled down on his heart that Christianity was real. The Great War played a huge part in his faith. As you can imagine, the Great War nearly destroyed him and his faith, and we'll go through a couple of the things that impacted him there. The mythology. So he always loved mythology. His degree and when he was a teacher, when he was a professor at Oxford, he taught mythology. He loved the idea of stories that told truths throughout the world, right? Mythology being lessons that you could learn from. Every culture had these stories. Every culture has mythology. He loved Beowulf. He loved Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Celtic mythology, and he even put together this Tea Club Bavarian Society, or TCBS, in high school. A bunch of his friends that would have gathered together to drink tea and talk about mythology like a huge nerd. Then C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis was an atheist friend who, through their friendship, found God, not directly, contributed to. I'm not going to say that Tolkien is the sole reason that Tolkien or Lewis found God, but he found God in literature and in myth. One of their discussions famously they had where they were talking about mythology and Christianity, and Tolkien said, Lewis, you believe like this mythology is great. I don't know where you're coming from. And Lewis said, well, mythology is all just myth. Like, that's the whole thing. It's just made up. And if you believe that the Bible is mythology, then it's also just myth. And Tolkien was like, well, no, the New Testament is mythology that really happened. And this is what it's all based off of. And that's one of the things that helped to bring Lewis back to Christianity. However, when he came back to Christianity, they had differing faiths. I don't remember what Lewis became, but he was not Roman Catholic like Tolkien was. But they continued to discuss theology and mythology for decades and decades after that, despite being in different sects of the faith. Also, Tolkien hated allegory. For some reason, he hated the idea of telling a story by telling a different story. He was always like, why don't you just tell me the story and then I can learn it? So it's important to note that what we're going to talk about in the last chapter of this, the evidences, none of them are actual allegories. None of them perfectly match exactly a character from the Bible. No Tolkien work is an allegory, yet still very Catholic. In fact, as Tolkien himself said, he said Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, and we'll see some evidence as that. Okay, so now the Great War and its impact on Tolkien, and just pretend that the dragons there are biplanes. This is Tolkien when he was serving in the military. In 1914, he and many of his friends became involved in the Great War, either drafted or joined up, and by 1918, all but one of his TCBS friends were dead. He wrote to each of them. They all wrote to each other throughout the war, and all the way up until each of their deaths. And I can't imagine how that would be very, very difficult to see all of your friends that you had these conversations with just vanish to this terrible, terrible war. However, the war did teach him about beauty. As he's sitting in the trenches, he's seeing no man's land, he's seeing people die all the time, he began to see that the war was the darkness, much like Lehi teaches in the Book of Mormon. You have to have opposition in all things, and the darker he saw things during the war, the brighter he saw things outside of the war. People complain that Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, that he talks a lot about a mountain or describing a tree or some flowers, but I imagine if you're stuck in a trench and everything is hell around you, if you look off in the distance and see a beautiful mountain, you're going to think that mountain's pretty valuable and pretty worth describing in great detail. He also became very aware of the machine. World War I was the introduction of many terrible war machines. You had the tank, the machine gun, mustard gas, airplanes that can drop bombs or fire machine guns, all of these terrible things, and industrialization and machine warfare. And he developed this understanding that these things were evil. They allowed people to kill without the respect for life, to kill without a connection, without an idea for what they might be doing to another person. The Great War was ultimately a catalyst for a lot of his work. He lived the war, he read about war, he saw that war was mythologized, so of course he's going to write a book about a war. This is something that he knew, unfortunately, very much about. Many of his wartime experiences then are seen in Tolkien's works, which we've seen, like Do Not Disturb the Water. It could be like Trenchfoot. I imagine any sort of still body of water in World War I was probably something terrible, full of disease or death or blood or danger. He also, in the books, transferred over the idea that only evil uses war machines. We only see Saruman building bombs, or Sauron building catapults, or battering rams like Grond, all these terrible things. The idea that eugenics and breeding is evil. A lot of World War I and World War II were about better people and worse people, and we need to make sure that the better people are breeding and building this perfect person, but evil is not. There was a big argument during World War I that those who were in prison or in insane asylums or things like this should be castrated immediately so that they are unable to continue to breed these evil characteristics that men have. And that was a lot of what World War I, the British were fighting for. A lot of the UK were fighting that eugenics is evil, that it's not right. And also that he picked up another idea that espionage is the main weapon. In Lord of the Rings, the main weapon isn't this big cannon. It's not some sort of large sword. It's not this amazing, overpowering thing. It's espionage. That there's hobbits over here, there's hobbits over here, there's a king over here, and Sauron doesn't know who to attack or who to chase. And he picked a lot of that up during World War I. The dead marshes being filled with dead men, wet and sad, and you're seeing all this death everywhere, very similar to No Man's Land in between the trenches during World War I. Just super sad. All right, the evidences of Christianity inside of Tolkien's works. We're going to bust through a lot of these. The biggest one are Christ types, with of course a Christ type being someone that acts or speaks similar to Christ, or does things that are similar to Christ. Someone that would represent in the story, take the same role as Christ. And there's three primary Christ types in Lord of the Rings. One is Gandalf, which is a given, right? Extra worldly powers, resurrected, pure of heart for good. Aragorn, who's a king coming to a throne, a king coming from obscurity, and he has the power to win and to heal, much like Christ. And then the third one, of course, is Frodo, who shows sacrifice, carries a burden for the world. He's wounded but never healed. He ascends into Valinor, which is like the Lord of the Rings heaven. Let's dive into each of these a little bit deeper. So Gandalf, of course, is a Maya, or an angel-like being who is sent to help men in Middle-earth, much like Christ is a demigod, godlike human, right, that's come down, and his primary purpose is to help people here on Earth. He experiences all of the same physical pains of the other men. We see him in battle. He's getting cut. He's fighting. He gets tired. He gets exhausted. He's living the same life and body of the people that he's serving, much like Christ came to earth and lived those same experiences. He stands between evil and the innocent, but he doesn't do the work for them. At no point does Gandalf come in with a sweeping magical power and solve everybody's problems. He's there as one of them, but he does stand between them and helps them to make the right decision. One of my favorite scenes, one of the ones that I stupidly tear up even when watching the movie, is when Faramir takes his battalion to go try to take back Osgiliath, even though they know it's impossible, and they're decimated, and very few of them are making their return to Minas Tirith. But the Nazgûl start chasing after them and picking them off one by one, and it's Gandalf who rides out and uses magic. It's one of the few times we see him actually using magic usefully, I guess, other than when he fights the Balrog. And he shines a light that scares the Nazgûl back and away. Doesn't completely solve the problem, but as long as people are doing what they should, he's there to help protect them for that short period of time, right? And we know that as long as we're headed in the right direction, Christ will protect us. He will do things that help us. He will help us grow. He'll make better decisions. And great to see Gandalf escort those people back into safety. He's frequently the teacher of all the characters of the story. There's not a character in the Fellowship that doesn't get some sort of a lesson from Gandalf, even if it's just one sentence that is wise and helpful and Christ taught a whole lot during his ministry. He's a prophet. He's able to see what others cannot. He returns from death glorified with power and new authority. We don't need to go into that. You can see the parallels there. He saved Helm's Deep on the morning of the third day. Of course, there's some symbolism there. On the third day we'll be saved, much like Christ died and was resurrected on the third day. He's consistently serving those who are looking to him as a leader, not bossing people around, but he's serving them and helping them feel better as they're dealing with whatever they're dealing with. When he fights the Balrog, he cites his authority coming from a higher power. He, similar to Christ having some sort of a priesthood power, he cites his authority. So he says, I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. So he's claiming his authority, which is just like any priesthood holder would, they put their right hand up and they say by the authority of, and they claim these things, and that's who they're working through. Much like Christ taught people to pray through him to the Father, and Gandalf is showing that how he has authority and a higher power. He casted out Saruman's corruption from Theoden, like the demons from men. We know Christ casted out the demons into the pigs, and then they all ran off the cliff, very similar to this. And of course there's even more. The Gandalf's the most obvious one, so there's listen. Here Gandalf didn't die, he ascended into Valinor, right? He got on the boats at the end and he sails off into Valinor, much like Christ. Okay, Aragorn is one of my favorite Christ types in the whole book, and we're talking about book Aragorn, not movie Aragorn. Movie Aragorn is a little bit of a reluctant Christ type, but in the books, Aragorn knows who he is. He knows where he's going. From his youth, he knew that he would grow to take the throne. He always knew, much like how Christ knew that he was going to grow to become the Savior, right? When he's 12 years old, he's in the temple. Should I not be about my Father's business? He knew from a very young age. His true identity is revealed to people gradually. Aragorn introduces himself to the hobbits as Strider, and it's not until they spend a lot of time with him that they discover that he's actually the rightful king of Gondor. Similarly, Christ introduced himself to a lot of people, but didn't declare himself as a Messiah until sometime after that. He has other names other than Aragorn, and names like Elisar and Estelle, the Renewer, or Hope. And we know that Christ has many positive names as well, like King, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He's prepared for the throne by serving Rohan and Gondor. So we know that Aragorn is 80 years old in the time of the Lord of the Rings, but in the 60 of the past years, he spent in Rohan and Gondor doing kind things. We know from his conversation with Eowyn that he fought in wars with King Theoden's father and grandfather. He was always there serving, learning about these people, learning about their cultures, learning about the things that worked and didn't work, and learning to love these people that he would then later become the king of. And similarly, Christ spent his entire ministry serving people, learning about these people, learning where they come from, learning what they care about, learning about what their wants, needs, desires are. He's rejected by his own, Denethor and Boromir. Gondor has no king. Gondor needs no king. Very similar, Christ was rejected by his own. Aragorn walked the paths of the dead to redeem the Oathbreakers with authority. Similarly, Christ walks through the spirit world after he died and redeemed the dead for their sins and offered redemption to all before he was resurrected. This is the big one. Okay, so these two right here. He uses mundane Ethelas, Kingsfoil to heal, and the hands of the king are the hands of the healer. This is not in the movies, so if you haven't read the books, this will be new to you. So after the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, there's loads of death everywhere, and the houses of healing inside Minas Tirith just get overwhelmed with the wounded. And many of them were wounded with terrible things like Morgul blades from the Nine Riders and other evil weapons. And the healers are having a hard time bringing people back. And Aragorn goes in disguise, goes into the city, goes to the houses of healing, and begins to heal people. And the way he does this is with Ethelas, or Kingsfoil, which is a weed, right? Even in the movie, they talk about that in the first movie, that when Frodo is stabbed, Aragorn says to Sam, I need Ethelas. Do you have Kingsfoil? And he says, oh, I know Kingsfoil. It's a weed. And so they all knew that it was just a weed. It wasn't valuable. But Aragorn comes into the houses of healing with this Ethelas, and he begins to use it to heal people. This is very similar to Christ, who healed people with mundane, useless things. We know that Christ healed the blind with mud, dirt, spit, things that when other people used them, they didn't have any power, but they did have power in Christ. And one of the healers, the head of the House of Healing, sees Aragorn healing people with Ethelas, and she says that there's a prophecy that says the hands of the king are the hands of a healer. This is a very similar Christ thing, that she's able to recognize that Aragorn in disguise is the rightful king of Gondor because he's able to heal people. He brings a new perfect kingdom restored like Narsil after 3,000 years, right? Going from apostasy into restoration, apostasy into restoration. Merciful to those who fought him. There's the Easterlings, the Southrons that joined Sauron's army and helped to fight at Minas Tirith and in other places. And once the ring was destroyed, Sauron died and all the orcs ran away. There were all these humans there that had expected to be slaughtered. And Aragorn told them that he had no quarrel with them. He sent them all home. He told them that there would be no more retribution or violence acted out against them, and they left. They found mercy. The Wildmen is a great story. When Aragorn and Theoden are taking their army toward Minas Tirith from Rohan, they can't go in the open fields because they know that they'll be spotted. So they go through the mountains, through the forest, and they get to a portion of the mountains where they are confronted by the wild men, these men that come down and threaten them that they can't pass their land. And Aragorn negotiates with them and tells them that they won't harm them. They'll make sure they go on certain paths through the woods. And the wild men actually help them, tell them what's going on at Minas Tirith, and give them information so that they can get there on time and get there correctly before Aragorn peels off and goes to the paths of the dead. After the war, after everything, when Aragorn becomes king, he dedicates a portion of the mountain to the Wildmen. He gives that land to the Wildmen and tells Gondor and Rohan that they're not to touch those lands, that the Wildmen can use those how they wish, and that they'll be safe and protected. So that's just showing that he's merciful to even those who fought him. He's a servant king. We talked a lot about this in the last one as well. He waited to be invited into the White City as king. Just like Christ won't push himself into our lives, he waits to be invited. After Aragorn goes and heals all those people in the houses of healing in disguise, he goes back outside of the city, rolls up his kingly banner, and sits outside in the camp until he's invited into the city by Faramir, who at that point is now the new steward of Gondor. So he doesn't force his way in. He waits to be invited, and then he comes in as the rightful king. Very similar to Christ. Frodo volunteered to carry the burden of the ring in the pre-adventure, just like Christ volunteered to carry our sin burden in the pre-earth life. He's fundamentally innocent. He has done absolutely nothing to deserve the ring, and yet he takes it anyway, much like Christ. He was perfect. He had no issues. The longer Frodo carried the ring, the more isolated he was. If we look at after Christ is arrested and he's going through the Sanhedrin and going through the Rome gauntlet, so to speak, more and more of his disciples are leaving him. More and more of his disciples are panicking and leaving and making him more and more isolated, very similar to Frodo here. He's under continual temptation. We get tired in the movies of seeing Frodo holding the ring and putting his finger in it and not putting his finger in it, and that gets a little bit annoying, but it's a very good way of showing that Frodo is being continually tempted, and we know that Christ was also continually tempted throughout his ministry. We have the story of the 40 days and 40 nights where he was fasting and the devil was coming and offering him all these things, and I'm sure that continued. We just don't have anything written about it. He shows mercy toward the pitiful like Gollum. Of course, we know that this is for Frodo, he's afraid that he might become like Gollum, and for Christ it's pity because he loves us, so it's a little bit different. The marks of sacrifice, right? Christ has the marks in his hands and his wrists, his feet, and his side that don't go away even after he's resurrected. And Frodo's stabbed in the shoulder by the Morgul blade, and that never properly heals. His stomach, he gets stabbed by Shelob, and that never properly heals. He gets his finger bit off by Gollum, and that never grows back. Very similar there. Sam carried him the last way, similar to Simon of Cyrene, who carried the cross the last little bit to Golgotha for the Savior. His failure, okay, this is not necessarily a Christ type, but this is a great Christian crossover. So Frodo's failure at the very precipice of Mount Doom shows that mortal effort alone cannot defeat evil. So this is going to come up to another big Catholic belief from Tolkien. It's only through God, or like eucatastrophe, right? This idea that there's a sweeping saving moment at the end. It's grace is really what it is. We can only take it so far, but grace has to make up that difference. So no matter what Frodo did, he could not defeat evil. It was only through divine providence, right? Gollum climbing on him, biting his finger off, and then falling to his death that the ring was actually destroyed. And we'll go into that a little bit further. Gollum betrays him to Shelob, similar to Judas betraying Christ. He was stung dead and then brought back to life. So after he was stabbed dead by Shelob and the orcs took him up into the tower, they stripped him down to try to find the ring. There was no ring, but they were under a command from Sauron to not kill any hobbits, but wait for information. So after they stripped him down naked, found nothing, and then sent word to Sauron that they had found nothing, they beat him and tortured him and mocked him until Sam came in and saved the day. So that's similar to the Savior. Of course, there's also the wondrous faithful. We know that there are many wonderful Christians that are mentioned in the Bible, and there are many wonderful, faithful people, and people that maybe weren't so faithful that we can talk about in Lord of the Rings. We're going to talk about 6 of them in particular. Theoden, of course, my favorite one. He fell to a slippery slope. As soon as Grima Wormtongue comes in and starts whispering these things, he slowly gets overcome and becomes useless. But then he's redeemed through Gandalf, and he's readily redeemed the moment he is healed by Gandalf. There's no, hey, maybe if you had come earlier, Gandalf, then this this wouldn't have happened, or hey, it's somebody else's fault. Somebody else should have helped me. He was redeemed, immediately owned it, and then started turning his life around and serving his people. He bore witness through his experience that we should stand up and be strong. He watched other people. He got rid of Grima all the way. He made sure that no one else was going to be attacked and hurt the way he was, that this negative talk drive anybody down into the same hopelessness or exhaustion that he had. And he persevered in that all the way until his death. We have Boromir, who was greatly tempted while in distress. It's difficult to see this in the movies, but Boromir was right on the front lines. He was seeing the terrible, terrible things that were happening right on the front lines. He was watching his men, his people, his family, right, all being killed and dying, and knowing that it was at somewhat of a stalemate, that there was no way for them to just win. So of course he's going to want this magical ring that can apparently do anything. They don't exactly know what it does. They know that when Sauron had the ring, he was able to kill many, 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 many people. So of course he's going to make huge mistakes. But he was redeemed through his actions as he went and fought off the Uruk-hai, as there were those two hobbits, Merry and Pippin, nearby. Not only was he redeemed by helping to save them, but because he was doing that, it drew the attention to those other two hobbits that didn't have the ring, but they were captured, and from that point on, Sauron and Saruman are pretty well convinced that either Merry or Pippin have the ring, and therefore no one's looking for Sam and Frodo. After the fight and he's about to die, he confesses his sins to Aragorn. He says, I tried to take the ring from Frodo. I feel terrible about it. I've done my best, but I did these things that I shouldn't have. And he felt that regret and repented, and he persevered in that righteousness all the way into his death. We have Éowyn. She was steeped in depression and hopelessness. She was more or less like the Denethor inside of Rohan, where she just felt there was nothing. There was no hopefulness. She says to Aragorn, the Shield Maidens learned a long time that even if you don't carry a sword, you can still die by one. So I may as well get out there and fight and have some glory, and maybe if I'm fighting, I'll feel better, right? Maybe if I accomplish something great on this battlefield, I will feel better and I won't feel so useless. And even when she has glory on the battlefield, she destroys the Witch King of Agmar, she stabs him in the face, I'm no man. She goes into an even deeper depression after all of that. And she ends up in the Houses of Healing. They heal her body, but they can tell that she's still unhappy, that she's still very sad. And she actually, in the book, is on the brink of death until Aragorn, in disguise, comes in and heals her with that Ethelas. And that begins to heal her both physically and spiritually. And in that moment, she meets Faramir, who Aragorn also heals with Ethelas, both physically and spiritually. And the two of them grow closer and closer together. And it's through their love that she finds a wholeness. There's a song that is only in the extended edition, but there's also in the book like a whole chapter about what happens in these houses of healing. The Éowyn and Faramir are both horribly distraught, but in each other they become more hopeful, and they decide that they can still serve these people, that these people don't need warlords, these people and kings and captains, these people need someone that's going to help and lift them. And at that point, Éowyn renounces her warriorness, right? She's not going to be a warrior anymore, she's going to serve these people. And that love and service gives her life meaning, and she's able to grow and become whole again. Gollum goes through gradual corruption over a long time, over a couple hundred years. He has the ring, goes darker and darker and darker until he's seemingly lost to the darkness. He's found in a cave in The Hobbit, right? He's beyond redemption, we would think. But we also know, as he's spending more time with Sam and Frodo, it's clear that he has some good inside, and that redemption is possible. But as he's starting to make that redemptive choice, he's challenged with even greater issues, getting beaten by Faramir and his men, and eventually he just chooses to cave into the darkness and try to get Sam and Frodo killed by Shelob. And ultimately, this is another thing that Tolkien believes in, like we talked about with the eucatastrophe and divine providence. Even in Damnation, Gollum did end up serving that providence. He bites off the ring, he takes the ring, and all is lost, but then he falls into Mount Doom. So he's going to serve that no matter what he does. Denethor, another poor person, he succumbed to despair and a lack of faith. We're all doomed. We're all going to die. No matter what people try to talk to try to help him come out of that, he views that as an attack upon his station. He's blinded by the pride of his station as the steward of Gondor. much like many of the faithful. And he even chooses to commit suicide to reject that providence, right? That divine providence. Many times, Gandalf, Pippin, others are offering to him this opportunity to change, offering him this faith, this hope for something better, and he chooses to push it aside. And in the end, even just ends up committing suicide because he's not going to face success, I guess. Which brings us lastly to Pippin. I could have done Merry as well. He has the same kind of story. He grows in wisdom through his suffering. He's kind of adult in the first book, and it's not until he's captured by the Uruk-hai and has to go through all these really difficult challenges by himself, working with Treebeard, trying to figure out how to get the Ents to go and attack Isengard, and other things, that he begins to grow in wisdom and stature. But he grows the most once he commits himself to be serving something greater than himself. When he meets Denethor, he commits himself to be a soldier of Gondor, and that's when he really, really grows spiritually and emotionally. He's forced to think about life after death. He's forced to think about how to be a soldier, how to choose who to follow, how to make the right choices depending on what his heart tells him, to the point where he even ends up choosing what is right over what is told. He's told not to light the beacon, lights the beacon anyway. He's told to let Denethor and Faramir die, chooses to jump in and save the day and help save Faramir, and tries to save Denethor, but he can't. So this is showing that we grow, much like in Christianity, from our adversities. There's a couple more key borrowings from Christianity in Lord of the Rings. For example, evil cannot create, it can only corrupt. Sauron corrupts all he touches. He's unable to create anything. He didn't even create the rings. He corrupted Celebrimbor, who was an elf, and convinced Celebrimbor to make them all of those rings. That God has a plan for grace. We talked about this with Eucatastrophe or Divine Providence. There's lots of examples of that last bit being solved by some divine item or some providential thing, like the Eagles. The Eagles coming in and saving the day at the very end and then pulling Frodo and Sam out of Mount Doom. Or when Gandalf is stuck on top of Orthanc in Isengard, an eagle comes and saves him. Or in The Hobbit, they make it all the way through the mountain, but they get chased by some wolves up some trees, and then those trees get lit on fire and there's no hope, and the eagles come down and save them as well. In Helm's Deep, there's no chance of overcoming Helm's Deep, but Aragorn convinces Theoden to ride out with him. They ride out, they start to have battle on the open field. They're done all they can, and then Erkenbrand comes in with the primary amount of the Rohirrim. Again, that last little bit. Or Frodo taking it right to the edge, like we said, and biting off his finger for the ring, etc. There's a lot of those. You make it where you can, and God will make up the difference, or divine providence will make up the difference. And then, of course, like the weapons of evil. So we talked about industrialization and machinery being evil, but the primary tool of evil used by Sauron, the most devastating weapon used by Sauron, was fear and despair. The Nine Riders, other than Weathertop, up until the third book, the Nine Riders don't really do anything violent, but wherever they are, they just cause people to feel fear. They cause people to feel despair. They cause people to feel sad and overwhelmed. In the books, when they come to Bree, there's absolutely no pushback. Nobody stops them because they walk in, they get such fear, they lock themselves down, they can't do anything, and the Nine go straight to the hotel, stab the beds, they can't find the hobbits, and so then they leave. But nobody gets in their way because of that fear and that despair. Very similarly, that's how the devil works. All right, so in conclusion, there are Christian messages and patterns all over the Lord of the Rings, and there is no doubt in my mind that the Lord of the Rings is a religious adjacent story. It may not be an allegory, it may not be saying things like Christ or Christian or these things, but it is for sure a religious adjacent story, much like Tolkien himself said. That's all. Thanks.